In the UK, police are bracing for the possibility of another night of rioting. The violence that broke out in London on Saturday is the worst in the UK since the 1980s. And like this year's Arab Spring, some British rioters are using services like Twitter and BlackBerry Messenger to organize the violence. But now Prime Minister David Cameron is looking at taking a drastic restrictive step for an open democratic country. He's asking whether it would be right to stop people from communicating via these websites and services when we know they are plotting violence, disorder, and criminality. In other words, shut down texting and social media. For more on this developing story, we're joined by Jillian York, Director of International Freedom of Expression at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. EFF is a privacy group which monitors freedom of speech and privacy in technology. So first of all, Jillian, what is your reaction to the UK government even proposing this?
Sure. Well, it seems like the call that they're making is actually just to limit access to people who are presumed to be rioters. But I would say that this is a pretty potentially dangerous call. As we saw in Egypt, shutting down the internet simply forced people out onto the streets. And I would say that restricting access to social media in the UK could have the effect of simply pushing people onto another platform.
But if these really are criminals, looters, people who are burning down buildings, what choices do they have?
Right. Well, if there are criminals and they're using Twitter, for example, to post messages, then the UK police do have different paths of recourse that they can take in tracking down those people and arresting them or what have you.
Now, Facebook has responded. They have a policy of taking down violent or hateful content. How do you think Twitter is reacting to this behind the scenes?
Sure. So Twitter has always stood up rather strongly for free expression. Back when the platform was being used in Egypt, they put a post up that said, the tweets must flow. And that's the same approach that they're taking in this case. They believe that this is free expression.
How about BlackBerry and Research in Motion? It's kind of a different story there.
Yeah, BlackBerry is a little bit tricky. It's sort of a one-to-many messaging platform, and the messages on it are encrypted. But as far as I know, the UK police do have means to get access to that data if they do believe that it's being used to incite violence.
So BlackBerry is facing declining market share. Obviously, the UK is a big market. Would that have any impact on RIM's willingness to cooperate with the UK government?
It might. I mean, I think RIM is in a tricky situation, just as they were last year with the UAE and India when those countries wanted access to those messages.
Yeah, exactly. And you do have experience working in the Middle East. Obviously, one of BlackBerry's biggest value propositions to users is security and protection. Wouldn't working with the UK government undermine that value proposition?
It could, and it could certainly, at least in the perception of BlackBerry users, people may not be as willing to trust RIM with their services if they were to cooperate with the UK.
Now, there's been a debate about this whole idea of a kill switch, a bill in the U.S. potentially that would shut down the internet in the event of some very pressing need. Do you know what the status is on that?
I'm not sure about what the status is in the U.S., but I do know that it would probably require a similar approach to what Mubarak did in Egypt, which is to literally press each ISP to shut down.
So you guys are totally against this?
I would be against that, yes. I mean, I think that, again, shutting down speech is not the solution. If there's speech that, is objectionable, then more speech is typically the answer. And
do you think the government should have any power over what goes on social networks?
I think that's a tricky question. I mean, certainly not over protected speech. Of course, there is speech that is not protected both here and in the UK, and that would include things like incitement to violence. And so in those instances, the police can and should track down the perpetrators.
All right. Jillian York of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be watching to see what kind of action the UK government, Twitter, Research in Motion, what action they take. Thanks for joining us.